Okay, get ready because today we're unpacking some absolutely shocking facts from the latest psychological research. We're talking about the hidden codes that literally dictate our daily lives, usually without us even noticing. We'll be looking into the secret mechanisms behind why we desire what we can't have, how our environment literally rewires our problem-solving skills, and why our brains are just fundamentally wired to rebel. We've distilled a massive amount of incredible research for this explainer, giving you what is basically the ultimate blueprint to your own brain. By the end of this, you're going to look at yourself, and honestly everyone around you, completely differently.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We've all been there, right? Someone leaves you on read or just completely brushes you off, and suddenly they are literally the only thing you can think about. Why on earth do we become so obsessed with the people or things that ignore us? Well, the psychology here is just fascinating. See, your brain actually views being ignored as an uncompleted challenge. It treats that person's indifference exactly like a really complex math problem that it desperately needs to solve. So you aren't necessarily obsessed with the person. Your brain is just hyperfixated on the challenge of winning their attention. It's an instant obsession mechanism triggered by rejection.
So, part 1. How your brain tricks you.
50,000. According to the research, that's the estimated number of thoughts that cross your mind every single day. That's a massive number. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. Roughly 80% of those thoughts actually lean negative. We're talking worry, doubt, anxiety, replaying past mistakes. So if you ever find yourself overthinking and drifting into negativity, hey, it's not just you. It's basically a factory default setting for the human brain. The big takeaway here is the absolute importance of staying active. The most effective way to counteract that overwhelming wave of negative background noise is simply to keep yourself busy with activities that bring you joy or demand your focus.
And you know, this negativity bias isn't the only way our brain tricks us. We also really love to believe that we're these perfectly rational creatures. Let's say you're buying a new phone. You probably think you're making a conscious choice, weighing the budget, comparing the technical specs, and making a highly logical decision. But psychology tells a totally different story. In reality, unconscious decisions are fully in the driver's seat. Your final choice is heavily driven by things like social trends, brand identity, and hidden emotional biases. Basically, your conscious mind is just making up a logical excuse to justify what your unconscious mind had already decided it wanted. Let's actually test those emotional biases right now. I want you to imagine looking at the most adorable, fluffy, clumsy little puppy. Seriously, picture it in your head. What's your immediate gut reaction? Do you want to gently pet it? Or do you have this weird, sudden urge to squeeze it really tight, maybe even playfully grit your teeth?
Now, what's really interesting about this is that the psychological term for that exact weird urge is cute aggression. I know, it sounds like a total oxymoron, but it's actually a brilliantly adapted survival mechanism. You see, when you look at something incredibly cute, your brain experiences this massive surge of positive emotion. And to prevent you from being totally overloaded and incapacitated by all that joy, your brain deliberately throws in a dash of aggression to balance the scales. It literally creates aggressive feelings to level you out and keep you functioning properly. So if our emotions are always trying to hijack our logic, how do we outsmart them? Well, the research reveals a really fascinating life hack. If you're bilingual, try thinking through a tough decision in your non-native language. Because your native language is so tied to your childhood and deep memories, it's heavily loaded with emotional bias. But thinking in a foreign language, that demands a lot more cognitive effort. It strips away that emotional weight and allows you to be incredibly analytical. It's honestly one of the most effective ways to force your brain to be highly logical.
All right, let's move on to part 2, decoding social cues and behavior.
Let's start this off with a highly practical tool, catching a liar. Now, most people think maintaining intense eye contact is the way to go here, but the psychology suggests otherwise. If you suspect someone is lying to you, try this. Break eye contact with their eyes and instead lock your gaze dead center on their forehead. Why does this work? It completely shatters their confidence. It makes them feel scrutinized and wildly uncomfortable, which very often breaks their concentration and forces them to stop lying or at least stumble over their fabricated story. Another incredibly revealing social cue is known as the waiter rule. If you're out on a date or maybe in a business meeting, pay very close attention to this contrast. How does this person treat you, someone they are obviously trying to impress, versus how they treat the waiter or the service staff? This is widely considered the ultimate psychological test of a person's true character. True personality isn't defined by how you treat your equals. It's defined by how you treat people who can do absolutely nothing for you. Moving from conscious behavior over to the unconscious, have you ever noticed that if someone across the room yawns, you suddenly feel this absolutely unstoppable urge to yawn too? You aren't just tired. This is called social mirroring. Your brain is equipped with these specialized cells called mirror neurons. Their entire job is to foster social connection and empathy by unconsciously imitating the behaviors of those around us. So catching a yawn is literally your brain's way of saying, hey, I see you, and I'm syncing up with you. Let's move to and see how this builds into a broader picture of our social lives with a few rapid-fire truths. When you're talking to someone, look for a Duchenne smile. That's a smile that reaches all the way up to the corners of the eyes. It's the only biologically authentic smile out there and a pure indicator of genuine trust. On the flip side, if they keep touching their nose, they aren't just itchy. It's actually a prime subconscious signal of deep nervousness, which often means they're worried about what you think of them. And looking at the bigger picture, an average person might make, say, 386 friends in a lifetime, but psychologically speaking, only one of those will truly go the distance. But prioritize that one connection, because having a truly healthy relationship doesn't just make you happy. Studies show it actively increases your life expectancy.
Okay, moving along to part 3, rethinking time and productivity.
Did you know humans spend roughly 30% of their entire lives asleep? For a long time, hustle culture has framed this as a massive waste of time. I mean, just think of that phrase, I'll sleep when I'm dead. But psychology demands we reframe this entirely. That 30% is definitely not lost time. It is the absolute foundation of your existence. Without that specific 30% of rest and cognitive organization, the other 70% of your life would just completely fall apart. The people who are truly productive don't sacrifice sleep. They aggressively protect it.
And speaking of productivity, let's look at how we actually utilize our waking hours. Consider Parkinson's law. If you have a 1-hour task but an urgent, immediate deadline, you're going to hyperfocus and probably finish it in about 40 minutes. But if you have that exact same 1-hour task and no deadline at all, your brain will somehow stretch that work to fill 48 hours. It's wild, but work naturally expands to fill the time you give it. This is exactly why setting strict artificial deadlines for yourself is absolutely crucial if you want to be highly productive.
We talk so much about managing time, but we also really rely on time to manage us. You've definitely heard this conventional wisdom a million times. Time heals everything. When we experience grief or intense anger, people always offer this up as comfort. But psychologically speaking, it's a total myth. Time doesn't actually heal the emotional wound. What happens is that over time, your brain simply builds a tolerance to the pain. You just learn how to carry the weight and live alongside the hurt so that it no longer completely incapacitates you. So it's not healing, it's adaptation. And that brings us to part 4. What shapes your reality?
Your reality is directly shaped by the data you feed your brain. The research clearly shows that the media you consume directly alters your perception of the physical world. People who constantly consume true crime shows and heavy news bulletins, they vastly overestimate the amount of real-world danger and serious crime around them. They literally perceive the world as this terrifying place. On the other hand, individuals whose media diets consist mostly of comedy and fantasy tend to have a much more positive, optimistic view of their daily lives. You aren't just watching TV, you are literally programming your own worldview.
And this brilliantly illustrates how even our geographical location rewires our problem-solving abilities. Social psychologists have found that Eastern and Asian cultures, due to their distinct philosophies and social structures, promote holistic thinking, which means focusing on the big picture, relationships, and context. Conversely, Western cultures promote analytic thinking, focusing on individual objects, categories, and direct rules. Depending on where you were raised, your brain literally approaches the exact same problem from a completely different neurological angle. It's fascinating.
But regardless of whether you think holistically or analytically, there is one universal human trait that unites us all, and it's something we've all felt. Why is it that the moment someone gives you a strict rule, your immediate knee-jerk reaction is the intense desire to break it? This brings us to the final and probably most defiant psychological concept of our explainer, psychological reactance. When you feel like a strict rule is threatening your personal freedom, your brain naturally, almost automatically, desires to rebel against it. This is exactly why forcing someone to do something rarely, if ever, works in the long term. As humans, we fundamentally require the illusion of free will. If you want someone to follow a certain path, you can't push them down it. You have to make them believe they chose to walk it all by themselves. We've covered an immense amount of ground today, right? From the unconscious biases that are picking on our smartphones, to the mirror neurons making us yawn, all the way to the psychological reactants that makes us rebel. You now have a front row seat to the hidden programming of human behavior. So I leave you with this final thought. Now that you know the hidden codes of your mind, how are you going to use them to change your reality? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.